Today we're pleased to salute Emilio Sanchez, a Cuban-American artist best known for his brilliant architectural paintings and lithographs. As a Cuban-American myself, I'll admit I was more than thrilled to learn we would honor Emilio this year. What's more, in a remarkable coincidence, Emilio was my wife Elena's cousin, actually technically a cousin of her grandmother. As such, I got to know him very well over the years. Elena and I visited him at his studio countless of times. We admire his work, and his art holds a special place in our modest collection. Today happens to be the centennial of his birth, a perfect occasion to honor the man whose masterful works can be found in permanent collections of major museums and universities around the world.
Emilio Sanchez was a friend of mine and a client of mine as an estate planner. Emilio Sanchez was a very disciplined artist, and he knew that his work was good. And he left me with the instruction, Eric, make me famous.
Emilio Sanchez is a person of great mystery. I really did not know very much about him.
Among Latin Americans, he's not that well known. And among Cuban Americans, he's highly regarded, but has not received the recognition that other Cuban artists have received.
He was born in Camagüey, Cuba, which is out in the country on a plantation.
This was the family sugar mill that was started by his grandfather.
He didn't have to work. He was the beneficiary of 2 trusts set up by his grandmother, so he never ever had to work. They had a governess teaching the kids at an early age, and then he went to private schools in the United States. So he was never really at home anywhere, beginning at an early age. His parents divorced, and then he lived with his mother and stepfather in Mexico.
So now he had this completely new center of influence around which he was exposed to many different Mexican styles as well as the Bauhaus school of Latin America.
An academy of fine arts, the Escuela de Bellas Artes de San Miguel de Allende.
His stepfather was the person who urged him to start drawing, and he asked Emilio to illustrate 2 books on Peruvian art.
He became exposed to this idea of indigenismo, or the study of indigenous people. From Mexico, he took that interest to the Caribbean, to Jamaica, Haiti, St. Croix and St. Thomas, Barbados, Grenada, and of course, Cuba. There's no doubt in my mind that the Cuban Revolution had a pivotal role in his life. With the revolution, they lost their properties, they lost the mill, the farms, and eventually his house and studio in Havana was confiscated by the government. It occurred when he was almost 39 years old, almost at the midway point in his life. He left Cuba in April of 1960 and never returned. After that, Cuba was a memory. And even though he would go to Puerto Rico and other islands in the Caribbean, the soul of Cuba remained with him throughout his life.
Being an immigrant myself, I call New York City my home, and I'm sure Emilio did too. Really, when you got right down to it, he was a New Yorker.
He was a New Yorker, and he loved being in New York.
New York embraced him and he considered it his home.
His stepfather was the person who urged him to go to the Art Student League in Manhattan.
And very early on, you could see him going to the theater, capturing dancers, capturing society ladies, men and women in drag.
The most important thing to recognize is that he was a closeted gay man.
You know, part of his identity that he was gay in a culture that did not accept being gay. In fact, when the revolution came through, they would imprison people who were gay. And I think that that must have caused deep suffering. I see the mysteries and I see the nuances, and that is intriguing to me. I think that makes his work more intriguing.
Emilio never graduated from college. Most likely he never would have, even if he hadn't become sickly. He was nearly blind in one eye, and then at the end of his life, he was totally blind in that eye, and it didn't slow him down one bit. He could draw the straightest line of anybody, He was a very dedicated and disciplined artist. He would start the morning after breakfast doing drawing exercises.
And he would paint well into the evening, constantly.
And that was his life, to be an artist.
And while he received recognition from around the world, in New York he always felt that there was more that could be done.
He complains that I get invitations to show in Bogota, in Panama, in Mexico, and other places, but nobody wants me to show in New York. He wanted to be recognized and was disappointed he wasn't.
And now when we look back from today's perspective, we recognize the limited number of women and minorities that were included in exhibitions. Emilio fell in that category of artists that were excluded, and he even set up a fund named after his stepfather. He was very charitable, the Philippe Cosio del Pomar Fund at MoMA, in his honor, and yet struggled to get any support.
And if we had succeeded in selling a lot of his work, those proceeds would have gone to ophthalmological research.
Early on in his career, Emilio was much more of an observational artist with a very loose sense of perspective.
You are able to see in those drawings a little bit more of a looser style.
Never a kind of precision, always a kind of quirky, fun.
He was more childlike. He would add a little touch, sort of a Cuban touch.
After the revolution, he begins to simplify things through geometry, through a much more strict sense of 1- and 2-point perspective. Lines become straighter, angles become sharper, shadows become shapes in and of themselves, and the difference between foreground, middle ground, and background begins to diminish.
I think he found his niche. I think he found where he wanted to go in these kind of architectural renderings that have been chosen for the stamp.
With this series of forever stamps, Emilio's name and works will be shared by millions of citizens of this country for the years to come.
Emilio always told me, you have to make me famous like Andy Warhol. And I said, Emilio, Andy Warhol was already very famous while he was alive. But I would be able to tell Emilio now, your stamp is forever. But Andy Warhol's is only 37 cents, and that never changes. So you're way ahead of him already.
The Postal Service takes tremendous pride in its stamp program, which celebrates the very best of American life, history, and culture. Every year, the Postal Service receives about 30,000 suggestions for commemorative stamps. A committee consisting of 11 individuals of diverse backgrounds recommends about 25 or so stamps for approval by the Postmaster General. While the Postal Service was in operation well before it was established by the U.S. Constitution in 1787, the first stamps were not issued until 1847, featuring Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. Since then, only 4 Latin American artists have been celebrated on a stamp. Emilio joins a list of notable artists whose works have been featured on our stamps. Among them, Ellsworth Kelly, Andrew Wyeth, Ruth Asawa, Edward Hopper, Frida Kahlo, and Georgia O'Keeffe. And he's the first Cuban American artist to be so honored. The stamps we're about to reveal were designed by our art director, Antonio Alcalá. They feature 4 of Emilio's most popular architectural pieces: Los Toldos, Tice Place, En el Sud, and an untitled piece, Ventanita Entreabierta. They are available at post offices nationwide. You can also have them delivered by going to USPS.com. At this time, we're pleased to present the Emilio Sanchez stamps.